Listen, we can't get it. We'll just
You can start.
yeah, okay.
I'll work on it.
All right, if you can get it, you can. We're trying a little trouble getting the YouTube streaming going. So let me know when you do get that going. Okay? So listen, I guess tonight's meeting, we have a tentative draft that came out that I think everybody saw. It's a review of the body cams, use of force and civilian complaints and officer wellness. So I think that Police Chief Robert Doss has sent out a couple of new body cams videos that everybody should have had a chance to review. So I think the first one went out was the subject who was at a local restaurant, and the restaurant called the police department to have it removed. Anybody have any comments on that particular video? What they thought about it?
Can I ask a question?
You
Can you-
certainly, I was just going to ask
Sure.
you.
Thank
Sylvia.
you. Yes. Can you just tell us a little bit, like what I saw Officer Feo's name there. Can you tell us how many years experience each one has, each officer that was engaged?
Yep, we'll turn it over to the chief to talk about that. Robert?
Yes, Officer Feo has about 3 years on. the police force, and the other officer there was Officer Hannah Lake. And she has about 2 years here, and she also had some prior experience with the town of Newburgh Police Department.
Thank you. Just the one comment that I would have, always want to, again, I'm not second guessing anyone or anything, but the one issue where she was close to the gentleman who was losing his balance, my just initial thought was, why be near him, just to, avoid any type of, I don't know, I don't want to say altercation, but just to his response, his, gross, response to her, don't touch me, when she really wasn't, but I understood she wanted to keep her distance from him. That was really the only thing that stood out to me.
Okay, any other panel members want to speak about that? Mr. Hubbard, you saw that video? Are you muted?
I apologize. Thank you for calling upon me. No specific comments regarding the videos, but I do have a question in terms of how your officers have adapted to the video camera, and has any video helped to address any issues or any complaints by the public specifically?
Robert?
Yes, Mr. Hubbard, good question. So they've been in place for about a week now. No civilian complaints have come in, so we haven't had to review anything to look at it in that nature, but I have been watching a lot of the videos back because it's a new system to us, so we're getting familiar with it. I've yet to have an officer not activate the camera at a time when it should have been. I've watched many traffic stops and quite a few calls for service, whether they were a pedestrian struck in a parking lot, was one, few domestics. One day alone this week, we had 5 emotionally disturbed people in one 8-hour shift that they had to handle. I reviewed all of those. And the picture quality, as you could see, one of the videos that was sent out, actually both of them were nighttime videos, but the one they went into the restaurant, so it was quite bright. The picture quality is excellent on them, so we're very happy with their performance in the field. And again, we demoed these units and we know how they operate, but now that they're in full use, we're pretty satisfied with the product.
I have a follow-up question, Chief, if I may. Is everyone on board? Are your officers on board? Is there any apprehension? If so, what are the issues or issue?
Yes, another good question. There was no pushback whatsoever from the PBA on this. There was a police chiefs meeting, which is a countywide police chiefs meeting that was held this morning. And some of the discussion I had with my peers was other towns are getting pushback from their PBAs, and they want it, not all towns, but a few of them want it to almost be negotiated to use them. But here there was no question and no hesitancy and no issues. And they were all, it's seeming to me, in my times with the officers, they were all excited to learn how to use them, actually. So,
Would you permit me one follow-up question, and I'll be finished with this, with interrupting? Is that because of your training that there's no pushback? Is it something that it was handled in such a proactive way that you did not have any pushback? I'm trying to understand why it was a seamless acceptance, which is a good thing. Perhaps a credit to the training and how you administer the office, which I appreciate and thank you for.
yeah, sure. So they were involved from the start on this whole thing. I think that's very important. We did listen to their input as far as, which clips work best on the uniforms, and any feedback that they had from the different brands that we tested. And we also involved them in getting them early on in the process of developing policy. So I think when you involve your staff in these things, because ultimately they're the ones that are going to be using these cameras, and they need to know that they work and they're there for their best interests, and they can rely on them, and we're not giving them junk, because top quality is what's needed in this type of field. And you can imagine those cameras are going to be out in all kinds of weather conditions. The officers, God forbid, might be in a traffic accident and be wearing their cameras. So they need to know that these things work. And I think that's what made a difference. And we have good professional staff here. And I guess I could say there's nothing to hide here. So whether they have the camera on or not, they're going to be acting the same way. And that's how we hold our staff accountable. So I think it was just an easy decision, and including them in the whole process.
Chief Doss, if I may ask a question, can you talk a little bit about how was the training presented and delivered to your officers? What did that look like a little bit?
So the first aspect of it was we put the policy out early, even before we implemented the technology, so they understand what was going on. I think that was kind of vital in the process. And then secondary to that, so they have to know when they can activate it, when they can turn it off, and when the items need to be charged, and how do they pull it up on the computer system to be able to see a video that they had recorded, and things like that. So a lot of that happened at shift briefing at the start of their shift. Their sergeants were the ones that were responsible, and most of our sergeants here are instructors as well, certified instructors through the state. So teaching, and part of being a first line supervisor, like a lot of it is being able to train your staff. So they went over the process of how to properly use the cameras, turning them on, turning them off. If it's a tactical situation, there's a way that you can silence it and turn the light off. So for officer safety purposes, they went over that procedure with them, and the charging and the care. The use of the lens, how to clean it before the shift to make sure it's a good clear picture, making sure it's not obstructed by the outer garments. That's all stuff that they all received uniform training in, so we don't have these issues. And we did have a short period, just of a few days, of putting them out in the field and making sure the officers got used to them before we went fully live, because there is an adjustment period. Oh, my jacket was covering the camera on that call. We don't want that to happen in the future. So we allowed a few days for that adjustment. Unfortunately, it's also winter. So with those outer garments, and we allow certain sweaters here and certain things. So hopefully all those type of situations were worked out.
Thank you.
Randy
Chief Doss,
Seifert, go ahead,
sorry.
go ahead. I was
No, I
going
was
to
just
ask.
going to ask, sorry. I was just going to ask really quick, can you tell us when do the recordings come on? Just what the process is?
So the process is simple, and the policy that was put out to everybody on the panel describes the process, but it's the cameras are to be manually activated anytime there's engagement with the community. So in other words, just so you know how they operate as well, there's a 90-second video recording. So when the officer activates the camera picks up from that point, but it also has video for the 90 seconds prior to the activation. So in case something happens really quick before the officer turns on the camera, that video is already being recorded and stored. So hopefully nothing's missed. And like I said, even with the cameras being new, we haven't seen an instance where the officer forgot to activate the camera. So that's how they're activated. And then there's very specific times when they're allowed to turn the cameras off. When the traffic stop is complete and the person that was occupying the vehicle that was pulled over is driving away, they could then shut the camera off. We got to make sure that the entire interaction with that situation, whatever it may have been, is recorded. We don't want to have it stop in the middle or something like that. And there's very stringent guidelines that we put forth for that.
Thank you.
Randy Seifert, you see anything on those videos?
No, I appreciate the videos. I think it's important that they do get turned on right before they go out and interact with people. It protects them. It protects all of us. I think it's a great idea.
Yeah, me too. Neil Fernandez, what do you got? Anything you want to say?
I agree. I think it's good insight for us to see from that point of view, the interaction, and how it goes. It's very interesting. And the panel pretty much covered most of my questions on this. Pretty thorough.
Oh, that's okay. How about Sean Davis? Anything you want to add to this?
Yeah, thank you. So I want to just first off start by saying that I am still working my way through some of the reading material you provided, and I appreciate that. And I will continue to work my way through that. The focus of some of my questions tonight regards the footage. I work with students, and before we started convening these meetings, I actually met with a group of students, basically middle and high school age students who from various backgrounds. And I asked them, what do you want to know? And what do you want to say? And some of the questions they had, some of the statements they even made to me were pertinent to some of the footage. And so I want to just say, before I even mention those, that I appreciate what the officers did. I'm glad that there was no harm done. There was nothing, no altercations. And I appreciate that. And that is good policing. But I do have some questions about both videos, and I don't know if we're just dealing with the Burger King one right now, and I can wait on the other.
Both.
If you want to hear both. Okay.
Both.
So the first one was, could I just have a repetition or a clarification on how the officer described the man in question at the Burger King? Because I just had some feedback potentially about how that maybe could have gone differently, and some of the concerns my students brought to me. So what was the description that he gave when he was sharing over the radio?
Robert?
Specifically, I'd have to go back and actually review that again for the exact specifics.
I think I did hear it, but I had to turn it up and I might have missed a word or two. But it said something like black male, black jacket, denim pants, something to that effect. And, my thought was immediately that describes about 20 of my students at any given time. And if they happened to be in the area, I'm not sure other officers might be able to distinguish between the man at Burger King and my students. And so my question would be, what kind of standards are there for describing individuals that are being interacted with? Because I could tell you what I noticed right off the bat. His pants were covered in white stains, which looked like potentially paint or something like that. And that to me is a much more identifying factor than just the color of his skin or the color of his jacket. And that's not to imply that anything racially inappropriate was happening. It's just to say that I'm curious as to how are the officers trained to describe the people they're communicating about, and is there a more effective way to do that? Because any number of people could have fit that description right off the bat, and it could have caused a miscommunication. Thank God it didn't. And it doesn't even mean that the officers did anything that they weren't trained to do. But I'm just curious because my students are wondering, why, if I'm a black student and I am wearing a black jacket, and I'm stopped and questioned when I've not done anything, what triggered that? Is it just because the officer is looking for a black guy? And I'm not trying to say something anything inappropriate or suggest the officers were racially charged in any way. I'm not suggesting that. I didn't get that impression. But that's how miscommunications can occur, right? Because if that's all that they're given, especially when there are other very specific identifying factors like the stains of paint on his pants, that could be much more helpful in identifying a specific individual instead of a generic description. And so I think that was the thing that stood out to me. Maybe the practical outflow of that is to say what very specific factors about this individual might help reduce confusion when you're communicating to other officers about who you're looking for, that kind of thing. So that was the first part. I don't know if you want to keep going or if you want to speak to that. Chief Doss or.
Yeah,
Yeah, let me,
so,
go ahead, Robert.
okay, so I believe are you talking about the description that was given in the initial call, or are you talking about a description that was given when the individual was walking away from the scene?
Right, when they were walking away, right.
So you're talking about at the end of the call, when the officer is just radioing to maybe another officer that might have been in the area that this individual. So at that point in the call, and again, you didn't get the whole call. We cut it down just for the sake of time. But
Sure.
at that point, I think the officer was just saying that there's this individual, whatever the description was that you said, is just walking away. And the call was essentially over at that point. There was no more interaction with that individual. Where he
Sure.
went, we're not sure. But I think where you may be going with that would be the description of when the officers are initially dispatched and they don't really know who they're looking for at that point. But on this call, there was a description given out, and it was pretty obvious because part of the description was it was a man sleeping in a booth. So that
Right.
kind of made it pretty simple in that situation. But I
Sure.
will say, to your point, it's extremely common for us to get bad information and bad descriptions of people when people are calling the police. And that's something we've done a lot of education with, especially within the school districts and within some of the businesses in town, that when they're calling in, whether it be a shoplifting or a suspicious person in a school, to be as clear and accurate as possible. So those kind of instances that you're talking about, regardless of race, just
Right.
height, weight. We actually even ran a drill in the schools, whether both in Newburgh and in Washingtonville. We were teaching something. We had an individual who was ultimately a plainclothes police officer, just walked in the room, said something, walked back out. And we handed out a form to all the teachers, write down a description of the person that just walked in the room and what they said. And we would gather all that information. We would go over that with them, and you would be amazed on how much that description varied. So,
Sure.
so my point is, the officers get quite accustomed to responding to incidents where the description is quite, frankly, nowhere near close to the person that we're actually trying to find. But the officers get skilled in that, and they take that information for what it's worth, and that's part of their job, is to sort out and find that actual person.
Right. Thank you for clarifying that. And two, I think the part at the end where he's walking away, I appreciated that the officer was saying, we don't really need backup at this point or anything like that. So I appreciated that he recognized the need not to escalate it, which I thought was a good judgment call, at least from my perspective, from what little I know of law enforcement myself. But I was just concerned about how he was communicating to other officers in the event that he did, call in backup. And if all the description was black coat, black skin, denim jeans, maybe other identifying factors more specific to that individual might be more useful to other officers who haven't encountered that individual yet. But that was just a point of feedback. And then the other one, just real quickly about the other video, it kind of stirred me a little bit because I have a lot of students who would potentially end up in a similar scenario. At least a lot of the details seemed unclear to me as to what the initial issue was with this young man. He ran from I guess an officer had stopped a car and he ran, but it sounded like he wasn't the driver, or so I'm not sure what all the details were, but I guess my question would be, is it standard procedure? And I apologize if this is a part of the reading that I haven't gotten to yet, but it's standard procedure to pursue someone who runs from a traffic stop when there's no clear crime having been committed. And if so, I wonder, not that they weren't right to pursue him, but I know students of mine who, for no other reason other than that they are afraid, might not have reacted as well as this young man did to being handcuffed. Just the terrifying thought of having to face family, seeing them in handcuffs, or knowing that they were apprehended, or and so I had a couple questions having seen this, not because I thought it went poorly, but because I wondered on behalf of my own students, how negatively might they have reacted if they were afraid, not because they did anything wrong. So I was curious as to what procedure specifically triggered the officer to need to put him in handcuffs. I know you said it was for safety reasons, but it was kind of unclear what those reasons were. You know, is running a presumption of guilt? You know, what triggered that particular course of action? And the other question I had was, you know, how does that interaction affect that young man moving forward? I mean, did that create a some kind of record where in the future, if he were stopped at a traffic light, you know, an officer would be able to see that he had run from the police before? You know, and those are my two questions. You know, what kind of triggered that, and also how does this event at all follow that young man into the future?
Okay, there was quite a few questions there, so if I miss one, just let me know.
Apologize.
So the call was, there was no call, so it was an officer attempted to stop a car for the plate. There was no license plates on the car at all in the front or the rear, and I believe there was an infraction as well, on whether they were speeding or whatever it was. So they attempted to stop them. There was no technical pursuit. They sped up a little bit and then they pulled into a business and they both took off. There was a driver and a passenger and they took off running as soon as the car stopped. So the officer, having seen that, found that obviously extremely alarming, if you would, and
Right.
decided to look further on why they would be running. And again, keep in mind the officer, from his personal safety perspective, as far as officer safety goes, he doesn't know why they'd be running. You know, is the car stolen? Or are they just scared and nothing else is going on? Is there drugs in the car? Maybe they have their mother's car and they don't have permission to have them. I mean, it could be a multitude of many things. But I think at the end of the day, it falls on the officers to kind of investigate on what's going on. So they secured the car. They do believe at this point that the car was stolen. We're still investigating that. That was something that was going on today. So as far as the young man that fled into the woods, and he was wearing a t-shirt, as you saw, and jeans, and was laying in the snow, hiding behind a tree, when an officer, and the officer that you saw the body cam footage of, wasn't the officer that pulled the car over, and he was not the officer that actually even witnessed them run away. So that officer in the video was checking the area to see if he could locate anybody. There was snow on the ground. He found some footprints, and it led him right to the individual. So at that point, you know, 10, 15, 20 minutes had passed. So it almost becomes a matter of, you know, these individuals were laying in the snow in the woods. You got to make sure they're okay. So, and that's what the officer did. So and you saw how he dealt with the individual. I'm not putting words in your mouth. You tell me how you felt. Very respectful. Called him out. Come to me. You're not in trouble. Just come on. We got to find out what's going on. Whose car is this? That kind of thing. Once he was able to help the individual out of the woods, one of the first things he asked him is, "Are you injured? Are you okay?" Because again, that's an important factor that the officer needs to know. Are you okay? So that happens. The officer hadn't had an opportunity to pat him down to know if there was any type of weapons or anything that he needed to be concerned about.
Sure.
So he was restrained in handcuffs until the situation calmed down and we knew what was going on. There was still another individual hiding somewhere. Again, we don't know what's going on at this point. So it's for safety reasons of the individual and safety reasons of the police officer. They walked him out of the woods, as you saw, back over to the parking lot, at which time I think I heard some audio, another officer that was there saying, you know, let me start my car up and get it warm so we could have him in the car and let him warm up before we figure out what's going on. So I think that explains most of your questions. Did it?
Yeah, I think so. And I appreciated very much the officer seeming to show very personal interaction and care. So I think I was just curious about the handcuffing part of it. And that obviously we want the officers to be safe. And we're assessing the situation, but I was just curious about that particular factor because I know that for my students, that's something that I think scares them. It seems so intense, especially the younger ones. I'm not sure if they would know how to act if that were happening to them, and if they were caught in a bad situation that they didn't know they were getting into. It's happened. Stranger things have happened to some of our students. So, you know, I'm just asking because these are the questions they wanted to know. These are the things they wanted to address. So I was just curious as to particularly the handcuffing, what caused that. But I guess it was just because you were saying they were investigating the safety level of what was going on.
Sure, and you have to understand too, they don't, just because they're police officers don't mean they don't have a right to make sure that their safety is ensured as well. There is a level that the officers are allowed to make sure a scene is safe for everybody,
Sure.
Including themselves. So because we value their lives also, as well as we value any member of the community. So putting temporary restraints on an individual for a period of a few minutes to make sure everything is in orderly, everything is calmed down, and those restraints are taken off, and he was told he was not under arrest. This is strictly just until we find out what's going on. As soon as we proved that scene was safe, the handcuffs were removed, and he actually was allowed to go on his way and wasn't in trouble.
Okay.
And two, I think you had another question too in regards to the records.
Yes.
So
yeah.
there would be a blotter made for that type of an incident, and the officer would update exactly what happened. And if the person wasn't charged, which he was not, and released, the record would reflect this is the individual's name, he was released, and that's all. So
Okay.
that's not something he would necessarily, he didn't technically, at this point, we're still investigating, but he didn't commit a crime, and it was an officer safety call.
Okay.
George,
Thank
can I say something?
Absolutely.
Yeah, you know, to this point, you know, on behalf of the district attorney's office, we very much appreciate body cam footage. You know, it preserves, you know, like they say, a picture tells 1,000 words. So you can have testimony all day long, but when you actually can see in real time what is happening, it makes it a lot easier to evaluate the appropriateness of certain actions, which, you know, we have a responsibility to do when the case comes to us or some charge comes to us. So I don't want to get too far into the weeds. Randy certainly knows what I'm talking about. The law dictates there are certain levels of intrusion that the police can engage in given the certain circumstances that they are confronted with. And, you know, whether they can simply approach and inquire, whether they can retain, whether they can, you know, seize a person. So all I want to say is with respect to the body cam, this permits everyone who might have an interest, you know, and certainly the district attorney's office does, others might as well, to evaluate exactly what happened as it happened, as opposed to testimony, affidavits, things like that. So to speak to what we're talking about, the body cam, is something that we welcome on behalf of the district attorney's office. You know, we're anxious that everyone, you know, have and wear body cam and preserve as they're directed to all of this footage, because it permits us to evaluate these situations. And from my perspective, what I saw, this was appropriate given the state of the law currently. The intrusion was not excessive given the facts, and that's what body cams do for us, for the police, and for the public.
Yeah, no, I agree 100%. That's why we had started talking about this project 6-7 months ago, Chief and I, and the board members were knowing that I was very interested in getting. I mean, for that specific reason, it takes a lot of doubt out what happened, didn't happen. But Sean, while you were talking, I'm thinking sometimes like all of us, I see these videos on the news, basically for me, and I see people run away, and I'm always saying, Mike, don't run, because some cops are nervous. Believe it or not, they are nervous. Don't run, or put your hands on the steering wheel. Why? I say to myself, please, just put your hands on the steering wheel. And sometimes I think that's the thing, that just follow directions, and then we won't have these incidents that are absolutely crazy. You know,
Sure.
he shot some guy in South Carolina over nothing because he's running away. The cop got nervous, shot him in the back. I'm like, okay, why? But don't run. If you just listen, most of the cops are fine. And if it's not fine, there's always guys like Chief Doss and myself in the district attorney's office who will take them to task. But almost everything that I see, it's someone is just not following directions, simple directions. And then it turns into something that is like, how in God's name did we get to this? So that being said, I'll ask the panel, do you have any comments about that particular aspect, about just follow directions?
I can make a comment on that. I'm wondering, you know, as we're talking about reform, how can we educate the public on these procedures, right? Especially our youth, you know, just how to be aware of how they can handle a situation like that, you know, so that it would prevent them from or give them the tools that they need in case they encounter something like that. Listen, running may not be the best option at that time.
Right.
You may be afraid, you know, you may be nervous, that's quite okay. But you can do the following instead. So, you know, maybe just ways in which we can educate the public, especially our youth, so that they are aware you have other options when these things happen. And, you know, from a law enforcement view, here are some tools that you could use. Just something to consider.
Right.
May I respond?
Yes, sir.
I'm 71 years old, and I, throughout my life, have had, let me back up. I've never been arrested, never created a crime, but in my life experience, I have encountered traffic stops where I have been respected as well as disrespected. Fast forward, I have male grandchildren who have different complexions, very light skinned to white. And their experiences are summarized in that they mistrust the police. And that's one of the issues that I'm glad I'm here on this panel to understand, that there's fear from their perspective, and rightly so, fear from police officers. So it can be explosive. My concern is how do I can help youngsters, whether related to me or not, youngsters in the community, to understand that you have no reason to mistrust the police. They are there to serve. Unfortunately, that's not always the case in real life. So thus the challenge. So what I'm trying to say is, for me to expect that my grandchildren are not going to have a natural fear of the police is not reality, because they see other instances where real life experience is that you can die, you can be harmed because you are a minority. And that has to do with a greater issue, in my opinion, as to the systemic racism that is here in this country. And I think all of us on this panel understand that people are perceived differently, and we're trying to find equal justice, equal treatment. But to expect that everyone is going to respond in a like-kind manner is just not reality. And I know from my own experiences in the town that I get, as a Black male, treated differently. But my challenge is to not to use those negative interactions, whether they be with the police or otherwise, to be destructive, but to help build a bridge. So I hope that my purpose in making that statement is that it is easier said than done, because there is the fear of police. Right or wrong, that's what the culture is about. There's a fear.
No, there's no question about that. And you always hear about the conversation that Black parents have with their Black sons. So that's pretty universal. And I think one of the things that there is a fear, there's no question about that. It just happens too much. But what I'm trying to say is like, just if you could just listen to what the officers are saying, and if things aren't right, that's why we have police administrators and bosses. They will conduct investigations. And if you can, even if you conduct an investigation, you say one thing and the cop says another thing, well, it's kind of like unsubstantiated. But then you get another guy come in saying the same thing about the same officer, the lights go off. Like, hey, what's going on with this guy? So we need to hear the complaints. We need to hear the problems. We try desperately and spend lots of money educating our officers. We just got some grant out of DA's office for about $7,000, doing some bias training with cops. It's always on the agenda. So listen, it's definitely an issue, and that's what we're here about. You know, we're kind of trying to figure out where are we going. You know, I don't ever want to see one of my cops shoot anybody, ever, ever, ever. You know, and that's my fear, is if you just kind of listen, and if you feel that you've been treated unfairly, we will deal with that later. We will take that officer to task if he did, and if he didn't, we tell you that we investigated and we didn't see anything. But the chief's going to cover a little bit about personnel complaints tonight, and if that's done right, you have a history of what an officer has done over his or her time in the department. And I know I mentioned it last week that in Minnesota, that police officer that kneeled on George's neck, he had 17 complaints in 18 years. Someone dropped the ball someplace. That's just crazy. So that's what we are trying to do here, to avoid those kind of situations. And I think when you hear some of the things that we do, we're looking for your comments about that, how we are investigating personnel complaints, how we are talking about use of force, you know, and there's a whole bunch of use of force. You know, we all think about someone's being shot. There's tasers, there's fighting with people. So we try to minimize all those things, because not only do we injure the subject, many times the officer gets injured. So he or she is out of work and we lose them for a while. And then there's a lawsuit. So there's a myriad of reasons why we are really very hot on use of force. So I think that's why we're here. We need to hear how you see things, and kind of I think the police know how they see things, but the more that they understand what other people are saying, I think that is a good thing. That's just my opinion on that. Anybody have anything they want to throw out there?
Sure. I just wanted to weigh in on this because working at St. Christopher's and having some firsthand knowledge this fall, as we've had some staffing issues. I've been working, not so much now, we've rebuilt our management and our administration, but in the fall we had some significant issues. So I had the opportunity to be working alongside youth and staff. And frankly, we had some incidents that are far more emotionally charged, far more dangerous for officers who responded to the scene, with our young ladies who were very dysregulated. And I found in every instance the response to be very helpful, very appropriate. I was impressed how officers maintained a very calm and therapeutic vocal tone. So for just the members on the committee who may be wondering how this translates to youth, and we have difficult youth at St. Christopher's, I found the officers' response to be much like what we've seen in the videos in terms of calm, respectful speech. At times, some of our youth have had to be, contained, have had to be zip tied in an incident, and we've never had a complaint from our staff, nor the youth, and it's a very difficult situation to walk in on. So I just wanted to, offer that. I've seen this firsthand, and I can say what I've seen on the video in terms of demeanor and approach is actually what's translated into some incidents that have been far more stressful. So I just wanted to share that.
No, I think it's good that there's a dialogue here, how, two people see things and they see things differently. So I think that's what the police, myself, what we're trying to kind of get that mindset out there to everybody. But you may see it one way, someone sees it another way. So listen, I think that we're going to kind of hopefully get some more videos, which I think are a great starting point. But I have another appointment that I have to run to, so Chief Dawes is going to make some presentations on the use of force and maybe get some dialogue going on that. And if we don't get into the personnel complaints, we'll get into it next week. But I will watch the end of this on the YouTube video, so I'll know what you folks talked about. But I'm sorry that I got to run out to another meeting at 8 o'clock. So Robert, I'm turning it over to you.
Yes, sir. Thank you. Pastor Anthony, did you have a comment, I believe?
Yeah, actually, I did. I wanted to just share something. I think really with the body cams and whatnot. Myself being first generation Italian, my wife is Mexican. Black family members within the mix and all kinds of stuff. I personally believe that these body cams are a great success and a great tool to be used by the not just the force, but for our community. In the aspect of there's a great accountability behind this. And when you go anywhere you go today, there's their video footage wherever you go. You go to the supermarket, you're not questioning while you're shopping, saying, well, if there's footage, if there's filmage, I'm not going to shop here. You go to Home Depot or Lowe's and these places, and you walk into the tool department, and you're watching yourself on videos, and those videos, those that footage, that filming of you, it doesn't deter the shopping, it deters the shoplifting. And I think there's an accountability when it comes to how we're going to speak and how people will speak and respond, as we saw in the first incident, as the man got up didn't want to get up and was kind of asked kindly a few times to get up, didn't want to get up, and when he decided to finally get up, maybe he kind of stumbled, lost his balance. I understand, but if the camera wasn't there, he could have said that the officer pushed him down, or vice versa. So the fact that the camera speaks for itself. Also, the camera isn't choosing whether somebody's black or white or Hispanic or whatever nationality they may be. It's it's showing you who they are and the color of who they are and what they're wearing and how they're going about. So it's great credibility on both sides, for both ends of it. Because myself being pulled over plenty of times, I hate to say, and having my fair share of situations with the police in the past and throughout my life, but I've noticed one thing, that sometimes officers are, I don't want to say this rudely, but are instigators, and I've also known that the person is being spoken to, that, if the officer catches them off guard, they kind of instigate the situation and escalate the situation over a simple little traffic stop. When you're just pulling somebody over, obviously if you don't have license plates, that's a red flag that something's off, I've been pulled over for having a light bulb out. That irritates me, but hey, you know what? You're looking out for the best interest of the person. Now, how many incidents have that happened to where somebody had something on them or something greater detail happened? So, you guys were able to exercise, your authority in that. But how many times people just said, okay, the light was dead, I'll take care of it, turn in the just proof that you fixed it and bring it in and we'll take care of it. But I mean, I think that these body cams are a way to go in the times that we're living in, because everything is being, word of mouth. We really can't trust word of mouth anymore. He said, she said. But these cameras are going to be making a difference for, this is what you did say. This is what took place at that moment, whether the officer was right or wrong, or whether the person who was being spoken to was right or wrong. It's an equal balance on both ends for the parties. So it's not, well, I'm a cop and you're not, and I have authority and you don't, but it's going to speak on both ends. And I believe it's going to bring a lot of accountability and reduce a lot of the things, because if you know what's going on, you probably wouldn't say certain things or do certain things if you know you have to be accountable to that recording.
Great points, and thank you for that. Ms. Harris, did you want to say anything?
I thought the body cam video was really good, as I said, that it allows for everyone to be like accountable. I think the second video was really good. That the officers was really calm and respectful, and he handled it really well. Like the car and warming it up so that the civilian could like sit in there, since he didn't really have like a jacket on. And the first video I thought was really interesting. I understand like from the officer's point of view of not wanting like him like in her personal space and like he's a little close. But then also like seeing from the video like that he kind of just like stumbled. So I thought that was really interesting. But yeah, I thought both the situations were handled pretty well overall.
Thank you. So we've had quite a bit of discussion just on two probably 2 or 3 minute video clips. So it appears I chose 2 good ones. I didn't have I only had a week's worth of videos to choose from, but keep an eye on that Dropbox, because as they come in, over the weekend, there's an extended weekend here for President's Weekend. If I see ones that are gonna certainly engage this conversation, I will rest assured that they will be in that Dropbox for you guys to view. So keep an eye on it, and I'll even email as I put more in there. But I'm glad this was some really good discussion before we even really got to the first item on the agenda. So anybody else, anything on the body cams before we move forward?
Das, I'd just like to say I appreciate the openness and the clarification that you brought to my questions, and I just want you to know that I appreciate this kind of this sincerity from a police chief and a police force. So I do appreciate that, and I educate my students all the time. Don't run, because I'd rather pick you up for a wrongful arrest if that were the case. Not that that would be. But I'd rather pick you up there than see you hurt or injured because it escalated needlessly. So we do that on our end as community leaders as well, in support of law enforcement as well, and for the safety of our students, because we love them. We want them to see the leadership in our community as a positive thing. And so we do that in support of you guys as well. So thank you for that.
Yes, and I appreciate you talking to your youth and bringing that forward to us, because that's a great reason that we put a youth pastor on this panel, was to relay. We can't have hundreds of people on the panel, but we could have people who represent other people come forward in the community to bring these questions to us. And that's what we need. And that's what this panel is all about. So thank you.
It's an honor to be here.
Okay, so let's move forward. What I'll do is I'll go over the use of force and how we handle things here at this police department. And then after I'm done, it should only take a few minutes to go over. We'll open the forum back up to anybody with any comments, questions, concerns. So as you guys know, I emailed the policy out to you all in regards to the use of force of policy that we have here in New Windsor at the PD. What you may not know, it's on our website. So any citizen could go on our website. It's on our main page of the police department under the town of New Windsor, and see it and download it at any time. And it's been there for probably roughly 2 years. It's not something we just did for this panel. It's something we're open and about and have no problem having the public see this. It's not a secret document. I will say our policy, and I spoke last time about accreditation, it's compliant with the latest use of force model policy of the New York State. So it's up to date. It's not something that's been sitting around on a shelf. We look at it frequently, the state looks at it frequently, and we make sure it's up to date. And as a matter of fact, our policy is even more encompassing than that of the state model policy, which you'll see as I highlight a couple things here. So I'm not going to read the policy to you guys. You had ample time to do that and go over it and formulate any of your questions. But I'm going to highlight a few areas that the governor's office has asked us to definitely spotlight here on this panel. So that's what I intend to do here now. So I'm going to just touch on a few areas of the policy in that regard. The duty to intervene. So there's a part of our policy where police officers who are observing another officer using force that's clearly beyond force that's objectionably reasonable under the circumstances shall, and when in a position to do so, intercede to prevent that use of force, that unreasonable use of force. That's an important policy, because if you look, you could look back to the Rodney King incident when all those officers were there. You can't tell me that there wasn't one officer that knew what was going on was inherently seriously wrong. And if it only takes one officer to step up and stop something like that from going on. And I know the town supervisor has talked about supervisors. Supervisors arriving at the scene as well they're the bosses of the police officers out there. So they have an inherent duty to supervise. But this is even going a step further for a duty to intervene, even someone that's of the same rank to step in and say, hold on, wait a second, and we've seen that happen over the years of experience here in New Windsor. So that's an important thing that's in our policy. And again, when I go over aspects of our policy, these are things that the state comes in and they make us prove that we're doing. So they'll review aspects of the policy. So it's not just written, and that's great. We have to prove on an annual basis that we actually are doing this stuff. So another thing I thought would be good to highlight in our policy is prohibited uses of force. You saw them as you read the policy, but one that's highlighted is number 4, I want to point out. So prohibited use of force. Force against an officer shall not use force under the following conditions: against persons who are handcuffed or restrained, unless it is used to prevent injury, escape, or otherwise overcome active or passive resistance posed by a subject. So you don't have to go too far to, there was an incident right in the county where you may have saw a video where a police officer, it appeared in the video that he did a leg sweep on the individual, and the individual fell to the ground and while he was handcuffed. That type of behavior here in New Windsor, I'm not sure what their policy reflects or anything like that, but here in New Windsor, that would be a clear-cut violation of our policy, and appropriate action would have quickly and swiftly have been taken. And again, that individual, according to the media, has been arrested and stuff. So, but I want to point that out, that that's in our policy. Reporting and reviewing the use of force. One of the things that the governor's asked us to go over is certain aspects of, so when a person's in custody, we are inherently obligated to provide medical and mental health care for these individuals. So if they're injured, we can't deny them medical attention. Many times, even with a complaint of pain and nothing obvious showing, if the person requests medical attention, we get them medical attention. The ambulance corps will come over into our booking room and evaluate. If the person wants to be transported to the hospital for whatever reason, or the ambulance corps is recommending it, it happens. So it's in our policy that we're obligated to do that. And obviously, nobody's going to argue that that is common sense and obviously the right thing that needs to be done. A couple other things here just to highlight. Anytime a use of force is used, the officer shall notify their supervisor as soon as practical and shall complete a departmental use of force report. So there's no secrets, and they're notifying their supervisors as soon as possible. Procedures for investigating use of force incidents. So that it's not the matter of the officer just using force, documenting it, and then it gets filed away in our records department. It gets looked at many levels, every single use of force. So a supervisor should respond to the scene if he's not already there to begin with, and begin a preliminary force investigation. The supervisor is made aware of the use of force. He shall ensure the completion of the use of force report and make sure it's correct. Photographs should be taken of any injuries or lack thereof of the officers and the individuals involved. Copies of the incident report and the use of force report will be sent to the chief of police or his designatee for further review and investigation. And it ultimately ends up on my desk for review. So you can see how many times we're looking at these, because again, extremely serious matters here. We don't want anything inappropriate going on. And if something is, we're going to act on it appropriately and swiftly. So not only are these incidents reviewed starting at the time right after they occur, but we also do a periodic review. So quarterly, we'll look at any use of force reports that have come in, and that's very important. And that's one we take seriously, because periodically, when you're reviewing these things, you may come up and see a pattern where maybe the same officer or two are the only ones involved, and maybe you had 3 or 4 incidents. Well, why are these the only 2 officers? That is something going on in their personal lives, or do they need to be retrained? Or so you could try to pick up on patterns that way, and that's something that we really look at and divulge into as much as we can. We also do, accreditation requires us to do an annual review of all of our uses of force. I have a lieutenant in charge of preparing a report, one report with all the incidents listed, and it has all the pertinent information on there. That gets reviewed. That's part of an accreditation process. And we also discuss these matters with the annual performance reports, evaluations of our officers and detectives and sergeants. They all get a yearly evaluation on how they're doing, how their job performance is. One of the things that's looked at on those job performances by their immediate supervisor is any uses of force that they had. So that's another level, putting eyeballs on these reports, that is there a pattern? Is there something going on? Okay, you know, this officer didn't have any uses of force last year, he had one this year, okay? Or is it he had none last year and he has 7 this year? That might be something you might want to look at. So our supervisors have been trained to look for patterns like that, and that's pretty important. And any weapons, and I say weapons, that meaning, you know, whether it be the officer's sidearm, any authorized weapons such as, say, pepper spray or a taser or a police baton, they're only allowed to use them if they're properly trained and demonstrate the proficiency, and they do that yearly. And some of the tools that they have to demonstrate a proficiency and training twice a year. So it depends on what tool we're talking about. And I'll get deeper into that when we talk about training. Training will probably be a block like this where I'll talk about it, and then we'll let the panel kind of digest it a little bit and talk about it and see if there's any changes we need to make. But as far as training goes, we're pretty out front, I think, and in many ways on that, and you'll learn about that shortly. So that's going over the policy. So a little bit more on this. So July 11th of 2019, there was an executive law signed into law, and basically it put in place a state reporting portal. So what that means is now no longer is just our use of force data collected in-house and not looked at by anybody outside of New Windsor. It's now carried over onto the state level as a collection site for all this information. The state portal is a little different than our reporting standards because we report all uses of force, any type of hands-on, even if there's no injuries, we report it and it's looked at by a supervisor, as I mentioned. The state threshold for reporting into their portal is different. They only want to know about any deaths that were caused by the police, any serious physical injuries caused by the police, any chokeholds that were used, and any use or brandishing of a firearm, chemical agent, baton, or taser. That's all they want to know about. So I'm going to go over our use of force numbers, and I'll break them up whether they're state reportable or on this bigger encompassing, all accountable New Windsor level. So understand kind of there is a difference there. So, and I think another thing that the state does on the collection of that, they put and again, this is just starting as of 2019, they're starting to put out statistics for uses of force, and you can look it up by department, how many times are they using force and what were those types of force. And it's a data collection point for whether it be the public or whoever organization wants to look at that information. And I think it's good. I don't think any aggregate data like that put out to the public is a bad thing. I think it's a good thing, especially when it's statewide. You get a vaster picture, much more information about what you're looking at, and you can kind of help maybe put it in context a little more. So let's start with 2019 use of force. So I'll go over our use of force for the entire year of 2019. And you'll see for most of our discussions here, I'm going to do 2019 and 2020. That's our most recent data, the most recent years. And those were also 2 years that I was police chief fully for those 2 years. So I think that's a good starting place. Doesn't matter what we did 15 years ago as far as use of force at this point here today for our discussion. I think it's more reasonable to be using pertinent and up-to-date information. So in 2019, the New Windsor Police Department had 21 reports completed for use of force. 21 reports. So if you examine that compared to our calls for service that year in 2019, we had 25,036 calls for service, interactions with the public. Of those 25,000 calls, 21 uses of force. That comes out to 0.084%. So 84 1,000ths of 1% resulted in a use of force. I think when you look at it in kind of those kind of numbers. So also in 2019, we had 1,626 arrests. 21 uses of force, that comes out to 1.29% of arrests. So of our arrests for that year, 1,600 of them, 1.29 of them, we had to use force to get that person restrained and in handcuffs. So I think that's kind of an eye-opening number. And furthermore, I'll break the numbers down and leave even a little further for you. As far as our use of force incidents, 16 were male, 5 were female, totaling 21 total. If you want to talk about the race of the individuals that were arrested and force had to be used, 8 white males, 2 white females, 8 black males, 3 black females, 3 Hispanic males, and no Hispanic females. So again, 21 reportable forms were done here in New Windsor. As far as that state portal goes that I mentioned, only 5 incidences were state reportable. Of those state reportables, what they were 1 pepper spray use, so a less lethal option, obviously, 3 taser uses, also 3 less lethal options, and 1 displaying of a firearm. No firearm uses or anything like that. So that is your 5 state reportables. As far as injuries go, and this is something that obviously is extremely important. You could use force in certain circumstances, but you should also need to look at the extent of any type of injuries, right? Because we don't want anybody injured. All right, I don't want any civilians injured. I don't want any police officers injured. So in total, we had 5 subjects that were arrested, received minor injuries. A minor injury is described as an abrasion, maybe a small cut, something like that. And 1 person complained of pain but refused medical attention. And 1 officer sustained a minor injury. I'll give you the same breakdown of 2020. Again, 2020 pandemic, reform legislation went through, 15 uses of force. Total calls for service 2020 was 18,166. If you use the 15 uses of force that we used here in New Windsor, being on that level, it comes down to 0.083% of contacts, so 83 1,000ths of a percent. When you break it down into arrests, there was 523 arrests, which comes out to 2.86% of our arrests. So 2.86% of our arrests, we had to use some level of force. And again, remember, these are people being arrested. Many times people don't want to be arrested. Total breakdown of these incidents as far as demographics go: 7 males, 9 females, 2 white males, 5 white females, 4 black males, 2 black females, 1 Hispanic male, 1 Hispanic female. As far as state reportables go, 4 of them, and they were for 3 taser usages and an additional taser display, which means they took the taser out, may have pointed it at an individual, but never used it. So by state standard, nobody got touched, there was no weapon used against anybody, but by the state standard, just taking a taser out and pointing at somebody, that's a use of force. So keep that in perspective. Same thing with a firearm. And one of those state reportables of the 4 was a firearm display. Firearm was not used, firearm was displayed, put back in the holster, whether that person surrendered or was taken into custody thereafter. So that's your state reportables, just 4. As far as injury levels, 2 suspects received minor injury. And again, I can even be more specific on this one. 1 was a small cut to the forehead, and 1 was a small abrasion above the eye. 3 people complained of pain but refused medical attention. And in 2020, we had 3 police officers injured. 1 relatively serious with a bite to the hand in 2020. So that's the breakdown of the years. As far as I think I wanted to point out something to the panel, because part of the discussion here is not only the use of force policy and is there anything we could do better for the needs of the community and any type of conduct or bias concerns with it. What could we do in the future? And 2 of the things I've already identified for future. I want to hopefully implement an early intervention system, which is basically a software program. I'll go over this a little deeper than I will because it comes up on some of the other aspects we hope to talk about tonight. It's a computer software that assists in monitoring citizen complaints, uses of force, leave time use, and other data to help identify the potential for an employee to be engaged in misconduct or behavioral shortfalls before they happen. So this program, and there's basically a program, it's basically the gold standard out there that I know other police departments, many in New York State, and certainly across the country, there's a software where you set it up to put this data in, whether it goes in automatically or someone's assigned to put it in. It's a special software that is able to calculate and look at things perhaps better than just an individual sitting behind a desk, hopefully putting the things in together to say, hey, you might want to keep an eye on this employee. It's raising some levels of concern here in the software. So that's a way we could become proactive before that officer perhaps uses an excessive level of force, or, you know, depending on what circumstance we're talking about, is maybe a threat for suicide or something like that. But the concern mostly with the software is civilian complaints and his behavior while he's working, he or she. Because as you can imagine, if you're stressed out and you have all kinds of stuff going on, if there's a way for us to pick up that in advance before that that pot boils over, if you will, I'm all for that. So early intervention system software is something that I want to look forward to. And the other thing I'm all for would be to put the aggregate data of the use of force, like almost like what I just went over with you all as a panel, online for the public to see and review. I don't have a problem with that as the chief. But again, those would be for panel recommendations if you feel that would be appropriate or not. That's something you guys can discuss. But that's a couple ideas for you to mill about as you discuss this. So that's my presentation on the use of force. Hope you kind of get a little better grasp of what's going on in New Windsor. And I'll open up the floor for the panel to speak.
Chief, I have a question regarding the incidence of use of force. Are you able, like, can you tell us like the time of day, or even are they happening more during the week? Is it something that happens more on the weekend?
That's something that can be researched. There's no, typically our C-line shift, which is our 2 p.m. to 10 p.m. shift, is typically our most busy shift. Whether it be with mental health calls, arrest situations, whether it be shopliftings and domestics, by far they are our busiest shift. That's when, you know, people are home, they're not working those hours as much.
What was the time again, Chief? What was
2
the
p.m.
time?
to 10 p.m. Yeah.
Okay.
But one of the things that and I don't think it's just New Windsor that might be a little bit, like we have software that we enter all this call data in and information to get stuff back out as far as analysis and data and numbers and great information like Ms. Briscoe Perez is looking for as far as analytical data, time of day of use of force incidents, demographics. It's not easy to get this stuff. So as part of my preparation for these meetings, you know, I have a lot of my staff working on these things. I'm working on them and getting prepared, and hopefully be prepared for any questions that can come up, because, you know, we don't really know every question that's going to come up with the panel. So as much as possible, we're trying to be prepared and present that information so the questions maybe don't come up because we answered them. It's not easy for us, whether it be certain data for traffic stops and things like that. And we had a meeting today, like I mentioned, with the chiefs about perhaps in the future switching software companies and things for our records management systems count, because we all have the same system countywide. But the system we have right now doesn't make it easy. But if there's any type of data you want, I could assign somebody here to dig it up and find it. So if that's information you want, you send me an email. I will have it for you by the next meeting for sure. I do have a breakdown of the incidents, the use of force incidents here by year. I'd have to, you know, go through them. Obviously, I'm not going to do that while the panel's waiting. But if you want that information, you know, we're certainly provide it.
I just asked a question, you know, regarding the time and when during the week, just to see if we can determine, is there a pattern, or, you know, are these things happening, you know, more frequently? Is it at nighttime? Is it, you know, between 2 and 10 on the weekend? You know, just to see which areas we can be proactive about, so that these incidents, you can lower the number if that is a goal of yours,
Yes, and that's a great point. So one of the things we do for this, the C line shift that I mentioned, that 2 p.m. to 10 p.m., we have quite a bit of staff on that for patrol assigned. We have more officers assigned to that shift, patrol-wise, than the other shifts. And accordingly, with it being so busy, we've even assigned 3 detectives. For this year was the first year we were able to do that. So we even have detectives working until 10 at night now, that are out there able to not only have extra eyes and ears out there, but to assist in investigations as they're developing. And that's been a big help out there, because it kind of lifts some of that load off the patrol division. They're able to clear the scenes quicker, to be available for calls and help other places in the town, where maybe the detective could remain on the scene and complete and conduct that investigation. So great points there.
Chief, is the use of force just for the arrest or use of force in general?
So use of force, it doesn't have to be an arrest situation. So if you have somebody in, let's say, mental health crisis, that perhaps they're off their medication, whatever the situation may be, our officers, we'll talk about the crisis intervention team, and I think Dr. Rubeck kind of talked about it a little bit. They're going to do everything in their power and means to not have to use any type of force to get the people to do what they need to do, whether that be go to the hospital for a mental health evaluation, or if it is an arrest situation, place them under arrest. The officers are very patient. They're trained in de-escalation and many factors in that regard. And it's even the tone of voice, like was mentioned earlier, a lot of things just to try to calm that situation down and get back onto the level of, let's reason with this. Listen, I'm worried about you. I need you to go to the hospital. But sometimes there is occasions, and you can see by the numbers, it's not a lot, where someone needs to be assisted into the ambulance or the police car for the best interest of themselves, because perhaps they are suicidal or whatever. And again, it could be many situations, but so it does encompass more than arrest, to answer your question.
Thank you.
Chief, how many hours of de-escalation training?
I don't have that in front of me. That's something we could certainly look at, but they do receive that type of training annually. So how much they've had over a course of a career, I'm not sure. They even get that training in the basic academy school. But when we get into the training block, being that that's one of the hot button items now across the country, is the de-escalation and the bias training. Those, I will have all that information definitely on hand for sure. But that is something that they work on annually, and de-escalating situations. And we do scenario-based training, which I think is the best type of training. We do some classroom training, obviously, too, but the de-escalation training, where you have role players and you might have different types of response levels as far as the officer's tools on their belt. We have situations where we run through, and if the officer performs as the instructor is wanting with the de-escalation techniques and those kind of things, that situation or that scenario and that training situation may end differently than when another officer comes up and doesn't act the way that the instructor is feeling appropriate or for the lesson plan. That officer may have a different outcome in that training session and maybe receive more training in de-escalation. So it's an analyzation done by the instructor on the time. So that scenario-based training, whether it be on the firearms range, whether it be just to do some updated training on domestic incidents or handling people in crisis, is really the best training, in my opinion, anyway.
I agree, and that's what I would like to have, not necessarily now, but in the future. If you give us an indication of what the block of proactive training is afforded your officers to keep them updated, proactively involved with the community in terms of professional treatment and professionalism overall. So thank you.
You're very welcome. With the panel members, when we do that type of training, I would certainly be open to some observers coming in to watch.
I'll raise my hand and say thank you. I would enjoy that.
Chief, can I also ask a question, or could you, in the future, possibly provide the use of forces, the numbers of the uses of forces that you just shared for 2019, 2020? Can you give us a summary, not details, but if some were mental health related, robbery? Could you just give us like an idea of how they, when they were used? Thank you.
I certainly can. I'm making a note of that right now. Anyone else? Come on, Officer Pierce. What do you got? No other comments on
Before you
this?
follow up, I have a quick question. If I'm not mistaken, Officer Pierce is involved in the school, Washington School?
Correct.
Does he participates in the Washington School? My question is, do minority students engage you frequently? If so, or do they approach you for tips of how to handle themselves?
The school I'm at currently, so they're not at that level yet.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, any other questions or anything you want to talk about use of force? So let's ask that policy for use of force, does it meet the needs of the community? How about, is there anything contained within that use of force policy that is biased or unconstitutional? Any type of conduct concerns as far as that goes that anybody on the panel can see? Anything brought from the community to you guys that maybe would be concerning as far as that goes? As far as our aspects go, one of the things the governor also thinks is important on this kind of stuff is, does the policy allow the police to effectively and safely perform their duties? And this is a policy we've had in effect for a while now. And my answer to that is yes. It does allow them to be safe out there and perform their duties. So I put the question back on you guys as far as, does it meet the needs of the community? And anything biased or unconstitutional, anybody want to speak on that?
I think the numbers speak for themselves. It's very low numbers. Given 21 reports in 19 and 15 use of force in 2020 out of some 18,000 calls.
Yeah, I think once people actually hear the numbers, I mean, I think a lot of people get a lot of information from the media and things like that, but when they actually sit down and have these kind of discussions and they get the data, I know the district attorney himself, Dave Hoovler, has gone around to each jurisdiction and acquired how many calls for service each went on and how many complaints were, and he's compiled those numbers for the entire county. And I'm sure Stu Rosenwasser could talk on behalf of the district attorney where I can't, but I think the numbers in other municipalities kind of reflect the same as New Windsor. So if Stu wants to talk.
No, I would confirm that the percentages, given the overall number of calls, I won't say they're infinitesimal, but the percentages are very, very small. Very small. And, really in keeping with what you're hearing tonight with New Windsor, if you multiply that times all of the police agencies we have, and put them all in, the percentages will probably even go down if you go countywide to what we're even hearing. And if you're hearing 15 to 20 out of 18 to 25,000 calls, that should say something. So, the alarming nature of the dialogue nationally really doesn't translate from my perspective, in my experience. I've lived in Orange County my entire life. I'm 69 years old. So maybe Randy can back me up on this. Really, the numbers tell the story. And today with the reporting requirements, and the courts are now required to send all the demographics in, on arrests and race, gender, and other demographic information, and you can see that it's really even less than what the chief is talking about here.
And I would agree with what was Stu just said. The numbers that I've seen, even in New Windsor, with the several cases that I've had with some of my clients having some mental health issues, we were acting out at the time. The police treated them very, very well. And at least one occasion, the individual had to go to the hospital. Well taken care of. So I would agree. The numbers are small, and I assume they'll remain small.
Okay, and I think we could attest to that on many levels here as far as our training. And I think, I don't think it's unclear here to say, I think it's the culture here. We don't have a group of officers going out trying to use excessive force. The culture here is to use little to no force unless it's absolutely necessary and there's no other option. So I think we kind of showed that here. So anybody else want to say anything before we move on to personnel complaints? All right, let's move forward. So the next thing on the agenda would be personnel complaints. I emailed the policy out to you all for review. I'll make note as well that policy meets New York State accreditation standards for best practices. I also emailed a copy of a civilian complaint form out to the panel. What you may not know is the civilian complaint form is available online on our website. It's been there for years as well. I don't know exact time frame, but it's been there for quite some time. It's on the main page of the police department, the first page when you click on police. It's right there. They're also pre-printed and available at headquarters here at the police department. If someone comes in and requests a form, you don't have to explain what's going on. You can come in and request a form, fill it out, and return it. But I want to also note there is a personnel complaint form, but I want to be clear that we investigate complaints from the public that are not on a form. And whether they come in through an email to me or a supervisor's told in the field and it's relayed back to the station, whether it's a phone call into the PD, it's investigated. So I want to be clear. Ideally, we would like to be on a form because then we have a written document and with a lot of facts on it that I could look into and investigate, but it doesn't have to. And as a matter of fact, the last one I investigated at the end of 2020 came into my email. And it was handled no differently than if it was on a form. So understand that. I think at this point, again, you had the ability to review the policy and pick out anything you wanted to. I'm just gonna highlight on some of the stuff that the governor's asked, just like I did with the use of force. So there's a duty to report as far as complaints go. So I'll read this part because I think this is very important. This is right in the beginning of the policy. Any department employee receiving a complaint regarding an employee of the department, whether in writing, in person, or by telephone, shall immediately notify and refer the complaint to a supervisor. So it's not the dispatcher's responsibility to handle the complaint. It's not the police officer's responsibility to handle the complaint. It goes to a supervisor. Number 2, under the same aspect, any department employee becoming aware of any violations of law, rules, regulations, general orders, or other policies and procedures by a department employee shall immediately notify a supervisor. So that puts our employees on the hook that if they know something's going on, that another officer violated a law, violated a rule, they now have a duty to report that to a supervisor. that's something that is very important, and that's why it's on the front page, because, you know, the town supervisor often says he'll refer to, you know, if one of the employees jumps off a cliff, they're gone. There's no need to have 5 other people follow them off the cliff. Stop it there, report it, let's investigate it, and go from there. So I think that's an important aspect of this policy. And it's one of the things that the governor's asked that we talk about and make sure is in there. So the town board, we have 2 members on the panel, one being Sylvia Santiago and Supervisor Myers. They have a capacity in certain circumstances and serious matters to act in the capacity of a police commission. So those are for incidents that are beyond the scope of what I have in my powers as a police chief. So understand that. I think that's important as far as they're the ones that are the police commissioners, because I like that because they're the ones that are elected by the people. And they represent the people. So if a complaint comes forward and it's serious, it's even above my level, they then step in and they're able to, should the circumstances exist, instill discipline within the police department. So that's a good thing as well. Because again, you're getting that outside eyes on an issue. The supervisor or officer in charge of a shift in which a minor verbal complaint is received shall attempt to resolve the complaint. So every complaint that comes into the police department isn't always put in writing and coming to the chief of police. Those are the more serious ones that come upstairs to the administration to handle. Okay, so I'll get into other instances where like a sergeant may be able to handle a complaint in a moment. So just please bear with me. If a complaint can't be handled by a sergeant or whatever the supervisor is that's handling it, to the satisfaction of the complainant, our policy says they're to do a form and then it goes to the next level. So if they're not happy with what the sergeant's telling them, it goes to the next level. And if they're not happy with what the lieutenant says, then it goes to the next. So there's multi-levels here of examination of any type of civilian complaints that come in. If a major violation of department rules, directives, policy is apparent, the supervisor shall immediately notify me, excuse me. So that's an important aspect. If something major happens, the boss needs to know. And that's something our personnel is good with, not only with discipline issues, but with major incidents going on in town. Those of you who've been around New Windsor long enough know we seem to have a lot of big stuff go on, it seems, at times. So you have to keep the bosses in the loop. As far as any other aspects of the policy, I think I read what I wanted to read as far as it goes. And again, you guys have reviewed it, which is good. So one of the things the governor's asked us as well is, what are the most common complaints? What are the most things like that are handled, and what level of the police department are those complaints coming in from? So most of our complaints that do come in are minor, and they're handled by the sergeant according to the policy. There's not a lot of them, but as you can imagine, being a police force handling 25,000 calls or 18,000, depending on the year, complaints do come in. Our most common complaint, as you can imagine, is someone got a ticket or a parking ticket or a traffic infraction type of a ticket they feel they didn't deserve. So they want to come in and talk to the police officer's sergeant, and that's their right. We don't have a problem with that. Most of those type of situations can be handled by a sergeant. Not uncommon. That's not typically something, that's not like a violation of a use of force. That's not something where someone was injured or they grossly acted inappropriate. The ticket was issued and the person's unhappy, maybe rightfully so. We don't know, but depends on the situation. So the sergeants are okay with handling that. So moving forward from there, so that would put our patrol division as our most complained about division. So it wouldn't be our detectives, okay? So understand, so, or it wouldn't be our lieutenants, or it wouldn't be. Civilian complaints versus internal discipline matters. So there's civilian complaints, and we're going to talk about those. I think you understand what those are if you read the policy a little bit, and it kind of self-explanatory. Internal discipline matters. Those are things where we as administration, it's me, there's a deputy chief who's here with me tonight, and 2 lieutenants. That's the police administration. It's our responsibility for any rule infractions that are of a certain level to get involved, and we're proactive with that. Okay, we don't need to have a civilian complaint happen to be able to look into a matter that we heard was going on and get to the bottom of it and do an investigation. Okay, we're not reliant on the public to complain. We could do that on our own, and we're very active in that, and you'll see that in a moment. So I'll give you an example of like an internal disciplinary matter. So if a police officer, I'll say these have happened in the past. So a police officer is involved in a motor vehicle accident. We investigate it. Maybe they were on their phone and the car sustained a lot of damage. That's not something we're just going to let go, right? So we have rules and regulations here that they're used to use due care with the police cars. They're not supposed to be on their phones while they're driving, those kind of things. So that's something we would look into, and we would investigate it and see where it went. And if there were violations of our policies, we take action. So I'm going to compare 2020 again in 2019. 2019, we had 3 personnel complaints. So if you look at it in terms of calls for service, there was 25,036 calls for service, 3 personnel complaints. If you break it down by percentage of calls, it's 0.012. So 12 1,000ths of a percent resulted in a civilian complaint as far as calls. And these, when I say personnel complaints, these are the ones where administration got involved and had to investigate. Of those complaints, I'll break it down demographic wise. 1 was a white female. I'm sorry, 1 was a white male, 2 were a white female, 2 were black males, and 1 was a black female. And that'll equal, no, that's not, I don't know what I did there. I'll clarify that in a moment. So there was 3 total. I don't know how my numbers are off there. And there was 4 internal disciplinary incidents in 2019 as well. So of those 4 internal disciplines, 1 of them was for off-duty conduct. The other 3 were for on-duty conduct that we looked into. In 2020, there were 2 personnel complaints filed. 1 of the 2 personnel complaints in 2020 was for off-duty conduct. And if you want to break it down into, the percentages of the calls, we went on 18,166 calls. 2 personnel complaints, it comes down to 0.011%. And of those 2 personnel complaints, 1 was a white male and 1 was a white female. 2020, we had 1 internal discipline investigation. As you could hear by those numbers, our officers, our sworn police officers, are accountable for their conduct on duty while they're here and also off duty. That was one of the questions that the governor wanted us to go over as well. So yes, we do hold them to their conduct when they're off duty, and that's in our rules and regulations, what they can and what they cannot do. One of the big things that we talked about is body cams. So when civilian complaints come in, personnel complaints come in, we now have a useful tool that helps us. Once in a while in the past, it would be a he said, she said. We really don't have any way to prove it either way. And it would be unsubstantiated. The complaint came in, but we couldn't prove it was true, or we couldn't prove it wasn't true. Now we'll have the body cam video to be able to help in that, to where if a civilian comes in and makes a complaint, well, they'll be a lot less likely to not be able to figure out what happened with that video. So that's going to become a useful tool. And I think some of the research that I did with these body cams is it showed that personnel complaints actually went down in agencies that instituted them. So we're hopeful that'll happen again. Maybe we'll be down to little to no complaints rather than, give any given year, 2 or 2, 3, 1, whatever it may be. Serious matters where there's a possible law violation by an officer, whether it be on duty or off duty. We obviously would get involved with that, and we would also consult with the district attorney's office for possible criminal charges. I've done that in my time as chief. The town board, like I said, is the police commissioners. So that breaks that down. I'll clarify those other numbers, maybe while you guys are in quick discussion. But again, something for future, maybe you guys want to discuss this. What I would like to see in place in the future to help out with transparency and maybe help prevent some of these personnel complaints from coming in would be that early intervention system software. I think that would be a valuable asset for the town, as well as putting the aggregate data online for civilian complaints and internal disciplines for public view. So like those numbers and those statistics and demographics that I just went over, I have no problem with those being online. But again, that would be up for the panel for discussion. So I'll stop there. So 2019, we had 4 internal. So just to clarify on 2019, because I do have the information right in front of me, I think I just transcribed it wrong. As far as the civilian complaint demographic goes, there was 1 white female, 1 black male, 2 black males. That accounts for your 3 personnel complaints in 2019. So I'm sorry about that confusion. Okay, I'll open up to the panel at this time for any questions in regards to department discipline or personnel complaints.
I have a question. Just you just touched on the cameras just a second ago. What's, the cameras are new, so and of course we're going through this or you're reviewing them. Going forward, what's going to be your process to review the cameras?
Great question, and that a lot of that's contained within the policy. So the sergeants are assigned to a squad. So a squad maybe have 8 officers depending on which shift it is. That sergeant's responsible to review periodically his staff's body cameras. So what that is just a periodic random checking of the cameras to make sure, a supervisor can't be on every call at every time, especially in the Windsor, because a lot of times we'll have multiple calls going on at the same time. So when that sergeant is free, he's required by policy to periodically check and review the policy to make sure nothing, just to review it, make sure there's nothing that stands out as a rule violation or something was said that shouldn't have been said, or everybody's being treated with respect. And then on top of that, there's our training supervisor is assigned to review some of those videos as well periodically. And on top of that, certainly me and my deputy chief here will be reviewing them as we review the blotter every day and to know what's going on in town. That's obviously very important for our jobs. If there's certain calls there, maybe we heard something happened or we got a complaint or we're just being proactive, we're going to be reviewing those videos as well. I got to tell you, I mean, obviously the system's new, like you said, Ms. Santiago, but I think I've reviewed almost every video just because it's interesting and you're able to see how the officers are out there and engaging the public and just making sure that they're doing the right thing. I think, and it's been a week obviously, but I haven't seen anything that I had an issue with, and everybody's been respectful. There's been no crazy situations yet. I know we go on some domestics that get wild. We have some mental health calls that get kind of wild, and they're going to be on video. And I'm really not even against, there's redaction software that came with it, so it doesn't affect the actual footage because that's evidentiary and you can't edit that or change that or shorten it or expand it. It is what it is, and that's built into the software. But you can export the software, and this is what we do if someone in the public might want a video and they may not be subject to see the person. If it's a minor, let's say, we might want to redact that person's face. I wouldn't be objectionable to putting out a video where things just got wild, and just to let the public see sometimes what the police deal with. And we would redact and things like that, but that may be something that the panel might want to toss the idea around with, because I've been in some crazy situations myself in my 24 years here, and they happen. And if it could be maybe put on social media as a learning experience for everybody out there, that wow, this is what they happen, maybe we could do something differently in our community. We're open to those ideas, and I'm certainly not so naive to think that there's never going to be a body cam video here in New Windsor that may not represent the police department well, right? Everybody, we're human too, and there's no doubt we're going to make a mistake or we're going to say the wrong thing. Those days, they're going to happen, unfortunately, and they're going to be dealt with internally, but we understand that the cameras work both ways, and that's part of the whole thing of having these cameras in place, is the transparency of having them. And I hope you guys as a panel understand, like I said, we are human and we're not perfect and we're not robots, but we do the best that we can. And I think hopefully by the end of this panel discussion, there's a greater understanding of by the panel of that, and in addition to that, the community that watches these, and in our meeting, that the community is going to be engaged as well about one of the final meetings, but and involved with the plan. But I hope that answered your question.
Thank you.
Ms. Harris, anything as far as our personnel complaints go, or anything, any questions you have that maybe any of your friends in college or anything had?
I didn't have any questions, but I think the idea of like putting out like the video that you were saying, so that people can kind of see, like, have an insight of like what goes down. I think that is a good idea. So maybe we'll talk about look into doing.
And I think we've seen, if you've watched any media, there's been videos put out for transparency, whether the police were right, police were wrong, those videos are put out. I even saw recently one agency, I forget where it was, but it wasn't a local agency, it was a different state. That police department actually put one of their body cam videos out to the public, and they actually wrote a disclaimer, like, we're putting this out very early in the investigation for transparency. We're not saying we're right in this, we're not saying we're wrong in this, and that's to be determined later on. But I thought that was actually pretty credible for that police department to do that. They're not trying to hide the video. They're putting it out there, and it maybe I can't recall exactly what the video was. It may not have reflected good on the department or whatever the situation was, but I like the way that they worded it, that, listen, we're not saying we're right here, we're not saying we're wrong here. This is the video, you make your own determination, and but be aware that we're going to be looking into this and investigating it at the end of the day. So any other input? So should I pose the question? Does this policy for personnel complaints meet the needs of the community? Is there any bias or unconstitutional conduct concerns here that anybody sees after reading the policy, or anything that I've said that maybe the panel thinks we need to adjust?
It seems like the policies they do meet the needs of the community. And I think it always comes down to who's enforcing them, right? How well are they being executed at that point? And I've been so far very pleased with your transparency, Chief Doss. And I think just to second something you alluded to or mentioned before, some of the things you're proposing, like putting statistics available for the public, even some of these videos, and then even your software evaluation proposal, I think is something that is very much, it's sort of like almost like having body cams, in a sense that there's a lot of transparency and accountability. So if that can be done, I think I would definitely say it's a good idea. Just to kind of second your idea there.
And I just want to throw it out there too. You're going to start seeing a lot of plans going up on various websites as we get closer to this April 1st deadline. So let's say the city of Poughkeepsie or whatever town or city or village, because everybody needs to do this, even on the county level. As a panel, I would suggest reading some other plans, maybe to have some ideas that you think would be great for New Windsor. Bring them forth here into this panel discussion, and let's talk about it. Because again, we're here to learn, and we're here to get better. It's not about the police department so great, so great, so great. We're here. There's got to be something we can learn, and we're open to those ideas. I know I'm coming up with ideas as we go, and I have ideas for other things as we talk about these topics. But I think your input is certainly valued, and I want you guys to speak your mind and understand everything that we're going over as fully as you can. But just talking about that personnel complaint that I handled at the end of 2019, it was for me as the chief, it was very time consuming. And it took me about 2 weeks to fully investigate something that was an email that came in that alleged excessive force. There was statements taken from police officers, multiple police officers, video from where the incident was alleged to have happened, video from within the police department, statements from civilians, recorded phone calls with civilians to further document what was going on. So you can rest assured, as far as I'm sitting in this chair, things are going to get handled seriously and they're going to get looked into. How they turn out is how they turn out. We don't go into that with any preconceived ideas of innocence or guilt. We look at these, you know, if we're right, we're right, and if we're wrong, we're wrong. I think that's what it comes down to. So, any other comments on personnel complaints that we can discuss here?
I did have a comment just on the software, your software wish, which does sound interesting. Who would be responsible for inputting all that information? How do you safeguard the integrity of the information? Given that, you know, you obviously want to use it for a specific outcome. You know, just some thought, not right now, but some thought later on, you know, who would be responsible for entering that information? Thank you.
Yep, and that's something. So right now we have, at the direction of the town supervisor, we have the IT department looking at the software. It's called IA Pro. If you want to do your own research on it, that's fine. But it is basically, like I said, the gold standard of the software that does the job the best. So they're looking at it first, and obviously if it meets our needs for IT wise for the town and it's going to work on our platform and everything here, we'll go to the next level of perhaps looking to purchase it. And we're not even to the point right now where we would know who's going to be inputting data. And a lot of it, my understanding is automatic. It'll draw a lot of that. We could have it set up to where if there's a use of force, it'll automatically go import from the form and stuff like that. So obviously, as much as it could be automatic and not have to tie up staff to do, I'm all for that. But it's being used by about like 600 departments worldwide, actually, not even just in the country. So, but we're excited to, you know, again, that would be a recommendation of the panel. So that's something we could put in our plan at the end if the panel so feels appropriate.
I'm back, Robert.
Does that mean I'm running too long?
No, but that IAP, I know I just picked up what you're talking about, and I think once I hear back from the IT department, then we'll kind of make a decision. But I did notice how many departments had it, and some of them are very, very professional. So I think that once I get the numbers, as everybody knows, I'm a numbers guy. I need to know what everything's costing me. I think then we'll take it to the board, but it certainly looked worthwhile. But I like the one thing that you said there, just a comment from me real quick, is kind of what it is, what it is. If they're right, they're right. They're wrong, they're wrong. It's pretty simple to me, and I think it's pretty simple to the chief. It is what it is. Like an umpire, calling the way you see it. So do we get some dialogue tonight on some of this stuff? I'm going to watch it on YouTube.
Yes, sir.
Good. All right. So does anybody have any other comments, anything they want to say before we sign off? No. Okay. So once again, I appreciate everybody helping us out. And just for the general public, we had a little problem with the Facebook feed. So it will not be there. We will try and rectify that for next Thursday's meeting. But this meeting is up on YouTube. Just click on the website. On our website, you take it right to it. You watch the whole thing. And I think in a couple of meetings from now, we'll really be taking some input from the general public to see where they are. So I thank the panel, especially for kind of helping us out and giving us a view that sometimes maybe we miss. So I appreciate that. Anybody want to say anything before I say goodnight? All right.
Thank you for the discussion.
All right. Thanks, folks. We'll see you next week.
All right. Bye.
Bye, everybody.
Good night, everyone. Bye.
Good night, everyone.